Like I think relationships in general are about like growth, healing, and intimacy, you know? And yeah, I think that the alternative has gotten really attractive for a lot of folks. And the alternative is just not having anything at stake. And that makes me very sad. And that is a mantra that I continuously, place in my head and my psyche when I'm faced with this, with the risk of actually getting involved on any level, a business partnership or relationship, et cetera. It's like, I just don't love the alternative. What's the alternative? Not trying, not looking for love, not going for what you want, not using your voice. I don't love the alternative. I'm scared as shit. I just don't like the alternative. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Yeah, you're right. I mean, what else? The other option is nothing's going to happen.
Yeah.
And you're going to experience none of it.
Exactly.
Yeah, I loved how you said that, like about the stakes. That's so true.
It's so true, man.
It's so true. And and I don't know what do you think is the cause of that now? Is it social media? Is it, I feel like with social media, I blame it for everything a lot of times, but I don't know. I just feel it's just given so many of us an out, or
Well,
I don't know. What do you think?
I think people are addicted to fantasy. That's what I think. I think we live in a culture of fantasy. I think fantasy is propagated. I think fantasy is pushed by capitalism to make a buck. And we live in a culture of persona and fantasy. I mean, you see it on Instagram, this, that, and the other. And so we live in this idealized sort of fantastical space, which isn't a bad thing. But fantasy is very often a child's first solution to overwhelming situations or overwhelming circumstances, right? If I can disassociate a little bit into fantasy, I think people have become addicted to fantasy. And so it is because of that when something or someone, et cetera, doesn't entirely perfectly fit in with that fantasy, with that ideal, it's just immediately written off.
Yeah.
And not understanding that the fantasy really doesn't serve you. I'm not talking about like manifestation or planning or thinking about who you want to think of, but I believe as a result of this culture of fantasy, people are very disconnected from the reality of who they are, the reality of what options are available. And fantasy is way more comfortable than actually having something at stake.
And I'm just, again, using this to apply over multiple things, but I'm just using online dating as an example. One of the biggest traps I feel of that when I was involved in that was it gives you the illusion that you have endless options. That
the worst,
both for men and women. A match does not mean that is an option.
No.
But it tricks you to think like, oh, well, if this person just does one thing, there's a billion other, especially in Los Angeles, where it's just so many people here. And it's basically a dog chasing its tail the entire time, and you're never going to catch it.
100%. And I think the thing is also about the apps is that because we understand like the dopamine hooks, right? Of getting a match, getting a message, getting a notification, and that feels really good. You get those hits, and when those matches or the combos are rolling in, it feels nice. And then you meet somebody in person, and it doesn't quite feel as good. This is a real person. Like you're not getting those dopamine hits. Again, it may not align perfectly with that fantasy, et cetera. So 2 hours with this person and I'm moving on. I'd rather go back to where the dopamine is. I don't know that's what I'm doing, but that's like the psychology of those apps, how they've been able to hijack people's minds to keep them on the app specifically.
Yeah, they want it to not work out.
Yeah.
They want you to pay the extra.
Exactly. That's exactly it.
And I'll quit talking past that because I don't want to reveal what I ended up spending on some of those, just because you're playing with also one of the most powerful things you can play with. You can either play with money or you can play with love.
Yeah.
And it's like when you're playing with love, it's like, well, only $29.99 for me to possibly meet all these chicks.
The person I'm going to marry or whatever it is. I know.
And I'm so glad you mentioned dopamine because as I was re-listening to our first conversation, you talked about getting back to like just that good, healthy, I don't know, I think it was serotonin you were saying, and just dopamine. I realize even on just like digital distraction, even with podcasts, ironically, we're on a podcast, but I have gotten in a habit of, going on a walk, put on a podcast, doing this, put on a podcast.
Cooking dinner.
Cooking dinner, put on podcasts. And there's great audiobooks, whatever. There's great things about that. But I realized, and I listened to a podcast, coincidentally enough, where he said he took a phone call while he was on his walk listening to a podcast. So the podcast stopped. And then he just realized, he's like, when's the last time I just went on a walk? And so I actually did that today. I just walked.
Yeah.
And just, you pay way more attention to things. And I'm like, you know what? As cool as this like technology and stuff is, I want to get back. Like you said, like, even those simple human connections can feel so good, but I feel like we've just numbed ourselves by all this digital distraction and fantasy, like you said.
So much stimulus.
Yeah.
It's like we've lost the art of focus, right? Like, what is the most valuable commodity on the planet? It's attention. It's attention. It's focus, right? And so like I ask our listeners, like, where is your focus? Like, if you don't have the ability to sit down for an hour and focus on a single task, then, you're starting from scratch. And the good news is that you focus is muscle. You can curate it, right? Your attention is truly your most valuable resource. It's what every single tech company is vying for on the planet. There's nothing more valuable. And it's this overstimulation, right? And I think a lot of people, myself included, we have a hard time finding real leisure, finding real like rest and relaxations. The parasympathetic nervous system, which is responsible for our rest and digest, right? 90% of the population is running around on a daily basis, not having any activity in their parasympathetic at all. It's all sympathetic, which is the fight or flight.